is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ. So he's not saying, well, you have fellowship with us, and then maybe we'll see if you can have fellowship with the Father and the Son. He's saying you need to have fellowship with us in order that you may have fellowship with the Father and the Son, but indeed you can have that same rich fellowship with the Father and the Son. But he starts by saying you need to have fellowship with us, with the apostles, with the apostolic teaching. Now, that strikes us as a little odd. Because again, we don't want some sense of intermediaries or intercessors, and that's not what John is trying to do. And I want to be very clear here. John is not setting himself up as a co-redemptor, a co-redeemer with Christ. You have to believe in the apostles and therefore believe in Jesus to have faith. He's not saying that. Remember, again, we're not talking salvation. We're talking about ongoing fellowship with the Christian community and participation and growth in the Christian community. He said, you are saved by Christ alone, through grace and by believing in him. But John does say you need to have fellowship with us. Now, I'm going to read you a couple verses that I'm sure you've read a zillion times before. But I want you to read them through this idea. These are some Pauline verses. Paul really kind of personalized the gospel. And he even uses the phrase, my gospel. Have you seen that in the New Testament where he talks about my gospel? Now, that doesn't mean the gospel of Paul, or a gospel about Paul, or a gospel of which Paul is the main character. It is Paul's teaching of the gospel of Christ, the salvation of Christ, his virgin birth, life, death, resurrection. But he says, I'll give you a couple examples here. Romans 16:25. Now to him who is able to establish you according to my gospel and the preaching of Jesus Christ, according to the revelation of the mystery which has been kept secret for long ages past. So he says, it is my gospel, the preaching of Jesus Christ, not the preaching of the Apostle Paul, but the preaching about Jesus Christ. But Paul says it's my gospel. Romans, you can also jot down Romans 2:16, 2 Timothy 2:8, where he also refers to my gospel. This makes us a little uncomfortable. Is his gospel different from Peter's, from John's, from Matthew's? No. But he does have a unique role in which he is ministering to the Gentiles, whereas the apostles' ministry seems more related generally to the Jews, so that changes as the apostolic age continues. Galatians 1:8. Really interesting what he says in Galatians, at the beginning of Galatians chapter 1. He says, he's already said, listen, we preach the gospel to you. You are diverging from that gospel. And he says, I don't care who comes and gives you a different gospel. You need to stick with our gospel that we originally gave to you. And in Galatians 1:8 he says, but even if we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to that which we have preached to you, he is to be accursed. Paul says, listen, this is the gospel. You need to believe in the gospel that the apostles are passing on to subsequent generations. Don't go making up a new gospel. Don't go listening to a gospel contrary to or that runs parallel to our gospel. The apostles are saying, this is the truth we have experienced, that we know, that we are passing on to you. And if you go outside the bounds of that, if you try to find some teachings about Christ apart from that, you're going to be lost in a lot of subjectivity. And Paul even says, let that person be accursed. 2 Thessalonians 2:15, so then, brethren, stand firm and hold to the traditions which you were taught, whether by word or by mouth, whether by word of mouth or by letter from us. In fact, I'll encourage you to drop down to 1 John 1, verse 5. So John isn't saying, hey, we are the originators of truth. He's saying we are conduits of truth, but we are the only reliable conduits of truth because we have the experience of being with Jesus. Look at what he says in verse 5. This is the message that we have heard from him and announced to you. So John is setting up this idea that truth comes from God. Jesus portrays truth and embodies truth to us. We proclaim that to you. And he says we are reliable conduits of that truth. And if you go outside our testimony of truth, you don't have fellowship with us, i.e. with the Christian community. So he's not saying we are, truth comes from us. He's saying we are conduits of truth, but you really need to stick with the truth that we are passing on to you. That's pretty heavy stuff. I read, this just came to my mind. We read this every time we do communion. 1 Corinthians 11:23, he says, I pass on to you that which I received. That's what Paul says. And that's what the process is. And he does assure again, I want to make sure you see this. He does assure his audience, and our fellowship and dead, this means is indeed, it is definitely with the Father and with the Son. So he's not trying to put believers at an arm's length. What's going on in early Christianity, as we've seen in Colossians, as you know from other books, Galatians, Hebrews, and as we're going to see here in 1 John, is that other people are coming and saying, this is what Christ taught, this is what Christ said, this is what Christ did. And the apostles are trying to say, you can't go outside of the apostolic testimony of the faith. Now, what is the apostolic testimony? It is the New Testament. And this is why it is vital for us to understand what John is saying, what his testimony is, because if we lose sight of that, and if we diverge from the teachings of the New Testament, or from its proclamations of the apostles' understanding of Christ, understanding of the teaching of Christ, and understanding of the experiences with Christ, if we diverge from that, we're diverging from New Testament apostolic Christianity. And the implication, and John will make this more explicit later as he talks about false spirits, that there's a lot of people running around saying there's other ways to get to Christ, there's other understandings of Christ. John says, no, we saw it, we're proclaiming it to you. And our testimony is reliable. My first year after Bible school, when I knew everything, and it all went downhill from there, by the way. The more I learned, the less I knew. But man, I was a bullet flying out of a gun, and I was just ready to get out there and do some ministry. And at our church in Cleveland, we had a fantastic, a wonderful man. I mean, this is the pastor. I mean, he was just fantastic, and he took me under his wing. And for 2 years during that summer, I was his apprentice. And it was just really a phenomenal. It was 2 months of wonderful ministry that has propelled me through a lot of not so wonderful ministry, as I remember that example that he set, and just his way of dealing with things. And I'll bring up stories from that time period every once in a while because it's really, really fun. Pastor Moore, he was an interim at our church in Cleveland after we had a very difficult situation, and he stayed for 5 years. So it's a long interim. Anyway, at that summer, as it happened, the Billy Graham Crusade was coming through Cleveland. Now, I've mentioned, I'm not a big fan of mass evangelism and these kinds of things, but what I did like, what they were trying to do is match people from different areas with nearby churches. So I liked that. And we got our list of 4 or 5 people, and we're going to go out and visit these people, and this is going to be great. Maybe we'll be able to, again, bring them into the Christian community, and not just get them saved, but bring them into meaningful fellowship with believers, kind of like what John is talking about here. So we visit this one lady's house, and she's a nice lady, and she's a little older, and she seems like she had a legitimate profession of faith, and she went forward at the Billy Graham conference, whatever it was, and she's talking about this, and then she says, and then she's talking to Pastor Moore. I'm kind of like off on the side. I don't know. She didn't even care that I was there. But anyway, she's talking about this, and then she says, "Oh, and I've got to tell you what happened. A few nights ago, I woke up in the middle of the night, and there at the end of my bed was Jesus."
Just a bit.
And now my mentor handled this marvelously, because you know what? This is the problem. So many people have experiences, and they believe them. As skeptical as we tend to be, we're also very gullible. And a lot of people, was this demonic? Was it genuine? I don't know. It doesn't matter. That doesn't matter, because the only real experience that we need to be focused on is the experience of the apostles, their experience of passing along what they heard and saw and taught, what they learned from Jesus. So after this, we couldn't really get her off this. I mean, she just was all excited. of her individual experience with Jesus. As though she didn't know that you're really not supposed to do an end run around the apostolic witness to what the New Testament says about Jesus. She just wanted to have this experience with Jesus. And the conversation really didn't go anywhere after that. That's all she focused on. You know, a lot of people have wonderful experiences in Christianity, and I'm not going to sit here and say, you know, that dream that someone had or that experience is not legitimate. That's up to God. I think I used to have stronger views on that, but you know, that's up to God. Here's the idea, though. Those experiences that you and I have cannot supersede or trump the experiences of the apostles. We need to maintain ourselves within the New Testament apostolic witness to Christ. Now you say, wait a minute. What about Jesus saying, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life? How do we know that Jesus said, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life? Because the apostles wrote it down. The apostles were inspired by God to write faithfully and truly those words. And we don't worship the apostles, we don't make them some superhuman kind of figures, but we do submit to the apostolic, the prophetic witness in the Old Testament, the apostolic witness in the New Testament, as it is inspired by God, because it is the inspiration of God that makes it valid, as well as the fact that those men were there and they legitimately saw those things. We dare not trump their experiences with our own ideas, with our own interpretations of what Jesus did and said and saw. So the focus of this verse is aligning ourselves with the apostolic witness. And again, I know that's hard to swallow for us in the kind of the Baptist Bible tradition, but I really believe that that's what he's going to say. And he's going to carry on that idea throughout here. He has a passion to make sure that people align with the apostles' experiences and testimony. And benefiting from those things. Saying, listen, we were there, we saw these things, and you need to experience these. And your experience of these truths can be just as valid and as meaningful as those initial experiences were. God can use our reading of Scripture as we digest what the apostles first saw and learned and witnessed. The Holy Spirit will use those experiences to make them more vivid. I can't help but feel that this is part of the problem here is the way we read Scripture. We read, you know, we read the newspaper and we set it aside. And we read a magazine and we set it aside. We read the Bible and we set it aside. We read a book and we move on. We read the Bible like we read everything else. And it wasn't meant to be read like that. It was meant to be read and experienced, and we are to enjoy these experiences. I'm not talking, please understand, I'm not talking about experiential Christianity. In fact, I'm saying quite the opposite. They've given us plenty of things, wonderful, dramatic, tremendous things to experience. We don't need any more experience. We need to follow those experiences that have been set in front of us. And I think we need to read the New Testament, the Old Testament, a little more meaningfully. And I hope that's what you've seen me try to do when we went through Ezra, as we've gone through some of these other books. I had a preaching class in seminary. I'm a little off script, but we'll jump back into the thing. We'll get into verse 4 in just a minute. I had a preaching class. I think it was the last preaching class I took. It was preaching Old Testament narrative. It was taught by my Hebrew prof and my favorite preaching prof. So the two of these guys got together, and there was like 7 of us in the class. So this was a really cool class. And we took Judges, and the whole semester we're going to just preach through Judges and focus on Judges. How do we just not tell these stories as though they're nothing more than history? How do we see the deeper theological meaning that the author is trying to portray and the experience of these people? How do we pull that out and share that with those to whom we will be preaching and teaching on a regular basis? One of the assignments of that was for the first 5 weeks of that class, we needed to read through all of Judges in one sitting, and we had to do it out loud. The first time I did that was horrible. You're coughing up blood by the end. I mean, it was painful. It was tedious. by the second and third time, you're finding things there that just by